Good afternoon, and welcome to this 11th International Meeting of Glycogen Storage Diseases. Today is the 8th talk, and Dr. Ulrike will be here to tell us about relevant lab tests. And what can we do to improve our numbers? Dr. Ulrike comes from Health Connecticut Children's Medical Center. And after her talk, she'll take any questions that you can leave in the questions and answers icon. Now we will welcome Dr. Ulrike. Good afternoon and welcome, Dr. Ulrike, and thank you for being here today.
Hello to everyone, and I'm happy that we at least have the chance to meet via the Zoom or the internet. It's hard for me not to come to Spain to see all my friends over there. And I really hope that everybody is staying well during these hard times. I try to give you some help. If I can't be with you and tell to each of you that you, if you get your own numbers, you yourself can know what you should do and what you can do to get better. First, we'll go very briefly through the definition of the Ketonic GSDs. You remember that I'm not that well familiar with the GSD type 1A and B. There are other people who know much more about this than me. So I usually concentrate on the Ketonic GSDs, and we very briefly will repeat what is the Ketonic GSDs. Then, which labs should your physician control? Which are the important ones? And first, which tests at all, and then which lab tests? Okay, what is a Ketonic GSD? A GSD, glycogen storage disease, is a disorder either in the build-up or in the breakdown of glycogen. The background, or what is causing these troubles, are some changes in your genes. And there are a lot of genes and enzymes that are involved in the build-up and breakdown of the glycogen. In the Ketonic GSDs, the glucogenosis, the ability of the body to create new glucose from protein is working well. But you can't build up or break down the glycogen. The glucose that you are able to produce from protein can be released in blood. That's why your blood sugar is getting up. But at the same time, there are ketones that are produced from fat and also released in the blood. So if your blood sugar was low, you usually can see that from the ketones in your blood. And that's why we call this group of GSDs the Ketonic GSDs. Just to repeat, which of the different, there are much more than 15 types of GSDs, which types are belonging to these groups? We'll use the next slides. First, how is the body usually trying to keep blood sugar stable? Usually all the carbohydrates, your pasta, your potatoes, your bread, all the stuff will be transformed into glucose. And then via something you can't forget, the glucose 6-phosphate, it will be transformed into glycogen. That's usually in the liver and a little bit in the muscles too. And then if your blood sugar is falling some hours, 2 hours or 3 hours after your last meal, the body is able to break down the glycogen again and get it back into glucose. And this glucose you'll find back in your body. I have written it down here, so later on you might read that once again. So that's how it should work. But in GSD type 3, 6, and 9, the breakdown of glycogen doesn't work as it is supposed to work. What is happening? The first thing is the build-up is going well, so you'll get more and more and more glycogen. And that's what gives you the big liver, and glycogen also is stored in the muscles and at other places. And the next thing is, if your blood sugar is falling, just from the glycogen, you can't get the blood sugar up again. We'll come to the way how the people with type 3, 6, and 9 are able to get blood sugar up again. But we have another GSD form that belongs to the ketotic ones. That's the type 0. Type 0, what is wrong here? People with the type 0, they are not able to build up glycogen. So they don't have any glycogen or only very little glycogen. So if they eat, if their carbohydrates are transformed into glucose, where should this glucose go? It just takes a deviation through the glucose 6-phosphate, the pyruvate, and then you get the high lactate. But it is not able to go here. Again, if these people need glucose, if their blood sugar is falling, they can't get it from the glycogen. They have to use another mechanism, and that's what we'll look at now. The mechanism where you get glucose from protein and a little bit from fat, that's called gluconeogenesis. How does that work? If your blood sugar is falling low, then the body says, alarm, I need some glucose for the brain. It's the brain that gets most harm if the blood sugar is falling. So what does the body do? It takes the protein, and most of the protein is located in the muscles, and will transform it into pyruvate, and from pyruvate via the glucose 6-phosphate. A little bit is going to something that's called acetyl-CoA. From the glucose 6-phosphate back to the glucose, and oops, that was the wrong way, and your blood sugar is getting up again. That's what all people with a ketotic GSD are able to do. But as I told you before, it won't be not only the breakdown of the protein that will happen, but you at the same time will start to break down fat. And your body won't differentiate. As soon as the blood sugar is low, this alarm system will start with the protein and the fat. The fat will be broken down into acetyl-CoA. A very little bit of the fat will be transformed into pyruvate and will end with some glucose. And the biggest part of the fat will go to acetyl-CoA, and then you get the ketones. That's where those ketones are coming from. There are some more things we don't need at the moment, or we can look at it. The sugar from fruits, fructose, is getting in here, And you see, it might go both ways, but usually it goes up to the glycogen. And if you have the fat and don't use the fat, you will get high triglycerides and the cholesterol. So if you, in a person with a ketonic GSD, only will look at the glucose, usually people will say, there's nothing wrong. The glucose is fine. And you'll miss all the bad metabolic periods where your blood sugar has been low. That's why it is very important in the ketonic GSDs to control the ketones, because then you can catch the bad periods. Okay, and that's how this works. How do we control whether the treatment of ketonic GSDs is fine? At home, you should control your blood sugar and, very important, the ketones. As I just showed you, just to have a fine blood sugar never will tell you exactly what has been happening during the last 2 or 3 hours. That's why you need the ketones. Then you have to control the growth, the BMI, whether you gain too much weight or not. You have to use the ultrasound or the MRI to have a look at the liver. You have to look at the heart, especially in type 3A, but we now know also in type 6 and type 9. You have to do a DEXA scan that will tell you something about the bones, and you will have to do the labs. Which labs? We'll go to that in a minute. Usually we do that at least once a year. And in children that are younger, or in people with an unstable metabolic situation, you have to do that more often, every 6 months, sometimes every 3 months. Which tests do we have to do? What will these tests tell me? And what can I do to improve my results? That's what we are going through now during the next hour. That's the whole list. And we'll go to each of this one by one. The complete blood count is first that you look at the white blood cells, whether they are okay. You look at the platelets or the thrombocytes, and you'll have to look at the red blood cells, the hemoglobin, the hematocrit, and the MCV, MCHC. What will that tell me? The MCV, usually that's what will tell me whether the red blood cells are too small or are too big. If I lack iron, if I lack folic acid, if I lack vitamin B12, then the MCV is out of range. MCV will be elevated if I lack the folic acid and the vitamin B12. MCV, the size of the red blood cells, is increased up to 4 months after alcohol. And the MCV is low if I have too little iron. That's why we usually measure the iron too. The iron and something that belongs to the iron, the ferritin. A low ferritin usually tells me that I have too little iron in my stores, that I need some more iron. The ferritin will fall low even before the iron is low, so it will tell me, oh, now your iron storage is getting low, you have to do something about that. But the ferritin also can be too high. The ferritin is often getting too high. If I did have again and again low blood sugars, this will irritate the mitochondria, some places in your cells, and will lead to an elevated ferritin. Ferritin is also elevated if you have an infection. So the ferritin is not only helpful to tell me whether I have enough iron or not, but it will tell me some other things too. If I lack iron, it's not very good. Even if the iron is low, but my hemoglobin, the number of my red cells, is still okay, we know that it might impair the development of children. They are late to develop. They don't have the optimal development that they should have. Why is there an increased risk for iron deficiency in glycogen storage disease? That's because the uncooked cornstarch, the maizena that most people of you have to take, will bind the iron in the food. And that's why you can't uptake the iron that you actually need. Then we have the liver function tests. You see, that is a long list, but that's the two most important ones. The one that is called the ALAT or SGPT and the gamma GT. You see, the ALAT has two different names, the SGPT and the ALAT. That's why I mentioned them both. It's a little bit different in which country you prefer which of the names. Both numbers, the alkaline phosphatase and the ALAT, are elevated if your liver cells are swollen. And why can they get swollen? Either because you have too much of glycogen stored in your livers, but also if you have too much fat in your liver. How can that come? Do you remember this picture? If your blood sugar has been low and you start a breakdown of protein and the breakdown of fat, then this fat that you usually don't use during the night, or very often also not during the day, that will be stored in the liver cells, and that gives you an elevation of the SGPT2. So that might be an explanation for elevated liver numbers if the glycogen in the liver is not too high. The liver numbers are elevated after alcohol. Alcohol is a very strong toxin for the liver, not good for the liver. And the ASAT and the ALAT are also getting up if you have some troubles from your muscles or from the heart. That's something that very often happens in type 3A, that people say, oh, my liver numbers are that high, but my liver is looking fine, what is wrong? Then it is usually because your muscles, we are going to the CK later on, because your muscles are not well. There's one thing, one thumb rule you can use to differentiate between the enzymes, whether they are coming from the liver or whether they are coming from the muscles. Usually, if the enzymes are coming from the muscles, then the ASAT is higher than the ALAT. The alkaline phosphatase is not only found in the liver, but it is also found in the bones. So it will be elevated when you are growing and if you have too little of the vitamin D. There's another one that tells me something about the liver, but also about other things. The GGT is elevated always if you have some acute damage in the liver. After some alcohol, not just the beer, but some stronger stuff, it will be elevated for 4 to 6 weeks. But It is also elevated with a lot of medication and when you are losing weight when your metabolic control is not good. So you really have to look at all the numbers together and to talk to the patient to figure out whether an elevated GGT is just because there's something wrong with the liver, or whether there was, let's say, a very nice birthday some weeks ago and you just wanted to say cheer to your friends. This number, the INR, is a number that tells you something about the function of the liver, whether your liver function is doing well. Usually it's a test for the coagulation, whether your body is able to stop a bleeding or not. But it's a very sensitive test for the liver function. Then you have the muscle screens. The most important one that most of you will know is the CK, the creatine kinase. It is located in the muscles. If your muscles are injured, if the muscle cells are breaking down, then you'll find the CK in the blood. If your muscles broke down, you will find the color from the muscle, the myoglobin, in the urine. That also will tell you there was something wrong with the muscles. And as it is very hard, the heart is just a muscle, and how to figure out with the highest CK, whether you only hurt your muscles in the legs or in the arms, or whether you are hurting your heart too, it is best to do the troponin or the NT-proBNP. Some people only do a special form of the CK, the CK-MB, the muscle brain CK, but it is hard to know whether that is usually also elevated even if your heart is fine. So if you want to get an information about your heart, better use the troponin. CK, even in type 3A, very often is normal until the kids really start to use their muscles. That will say, until they start to walk. If the CK is too high, as I told you before, it is a sign that there is a muscle breakdown. And if you overdid an exercise, or if a child did all too much, the muscle enzymes, the CK, will be elevated for some weeks. Even healthy people can have an elevated CK. If you take somebody who is running a marathon, then their CK numbers are getting up to 5,000 or 10,000. The normal number is up to, let's say, something like 250. But there, if after a marathon or some competition, these numbers will, even in healthy people, get up to 5,000 or even more for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. The other thing you can have a look at is the myoglobin. Either you measure it in blood, that's a little bit complicated, or you measure it in the urine. That's very easy. That's something you can do at home. I'll show you how you can do that. You have to use the hemoglobin sticks from the sticks that you usually use for diabetic people. Something like 6 hours after the exercise, the myoglobin will be in the blood, and then you can find it in the urine. Look at that. That's most of you will have seen something like that from the people who have diabetes, or where you have a look whether somebody has urinary infection. On this little stripe, you have some small areas that will change color if there's sugar on it or if there's too much protein, and if you have hemoglobin. Hemoglobin looks more or less like the myoglobin, the protein that's in the muscle. So if the muscle cells get damaged, you will find the myoglobin in the blood and then some hours later in the urine. And as the myoglobin is more or less looking like the hemoglobin, the test will get positive if you, for example, exercised too hard. So if somebody is starting to exercise and want to know, did I do too much or is that okay? You just can use this Combur test. It doesn't cost very much, and you just pee on it something like 6 hours later or the next morning, and then you get the information. Protein, you have to know about the protein. So the protein will tell you, if you measure protein in blood, will tell you whether you have enough protein in your food, in your body. And protein is very important for growth and for your muscles. So it's one of the very important numbers. Usually I ask people to get measured the total protein. That's something that is changing slowly. The pre-albumin that we are very fond of to use is changing fast, but it will tell me if you, for example, had again and again low blood sugar, and thus you had to use your protein for stabilizing the blood sugar. But you have to remember pre-albumin will be low during or a few days after an infection. Albumin, that's what lots of my colleagues use, won't tell you very much about the protein, whether you have enough protein or not. Albumin is more telling you about the liver function. So I would prefer total protein and pre-albumin. Cholesterol and fats, we have to check. And we do that in something we call a random lipid panel. Random, that means don't go to the hospital or to your physician to take the blood sample fasting. Why not? If you are fasting, you know you had to use your protein and you had to use your fat to stabilize blood sugar. That's why the cholesterol and the triglycerides will be high if you measure the stuff fasting. You also should not do it after a big meal with a lot of fat in it, but just after a regular breakfast, go there to the lab and do that. And then you will get the real numbers. If your cholesterol and the triglycerides are elevated, that's usually a sign that your metabolic control is not very good. Especially if your blood sugar has been down again and again during the night. Then you'll end up with an elevated cholesterol during the day. How to treat that? Don't use medicine for that, but just use the right amount of cornstarch and protein to get a better metabolic control. And be patient, because it might take months, very often 3 or 4 or 5 months, until this, especially the cholesterol, will go down again. And something very important, most of the physicians will prescribe statins to treat high cholesterol, but this will damage the muscles in most of the GSD people, especially the type 3A. So don't use statins, but treat your high cholesterol by improving your metabolic control. How to check liver function? I know that many people are afraid that they would that they would hurt their, not the liver, the kidneys, that they would hurt their kidneys, especially if they eat such a lot of protein as you have to use in the ketotic forms. But there are very good publications from a lot of people with Ketonic GSDs who used the high protein diet for a long time, and none of them has got any impaired kidney function. Which tests do we use to check the kidneys? That's the urea, the creatinine, uric acid, and then if you really are afraid that something is wrong with your kidneys, the microalbumin that you can find in the urine if your kidneys have taken harm. The BUN, or urea as it is usually called, is elevated if you eat a lot of protein. So we want to have the urea at the upper limit in GSD 0, 3, 6, and 9, because this will tell me, yes, this is a person who really gets enough protein. So in the ketotic forms, an elevated BUN is not a sign of liver damage. Creatinine, that's the other number that physicians usually use to check kidney function. Creatinine comes from the muscles. So people who have only few muscles, especially the type 3A, they usually have a low creatinine number. So yeah, I can't remember a single patient who did have an elevated creatinine that would tell me, yes, here is some kidney damage done, not a single one of them. Uric acid that we also check in these patients usually gets up if you have again ketosis or at metabolic control, chronic catabolic state that will say that your blood sugar has been low several times. But there are other situations when uric acid is getting up. It is gout, and something that I had to learn because some of my younger kids or young adults came back with high uric acid, and then we figured out it was the coffee that they drank. It was all too much. So it's not dangerous, but you have to know the differential diagnosis. Something that gives me a lot of information, especially in patients who don't have the chance to check their ketones very often, that's bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is something that usually should eliminate the extra acids that you get in your blood. A chronic acidosis gets the body to produce more of the bicarbonate, and the acidosis you will get in Ketonic GSDs with all the ketones. So if I have a patient with an elevated bicarbonate, but who tells me, no, I never check my ketones, then I can tell this person, but I guess that you did have elevated ketones again and again, and that's what forced your body to get the bicarbonate up. There's a new test that I have not used in my patients because they don't use it up in the Faroe Islands. Terry Derks, he has a lot of experience with the GLUC4, the glucose tetrasaccharide. You see, what I've written down here, that's a breakdown from the glycogen. And the more glycogen you have stored, the higher is your GLUC4. You can measure it in the urine, and it usually tells you also if you have too much glycogen in your muscles. Terry Dirks, for example, he will use it to figure out whether your treatment, whether you're following your diet, especially for the type 3A, where you want to know that, or where you want to make sure that there is not too much glycogen in the muscle. Then we have the bones. And to learn something about the bones, we check the vitamin D and the calcium. That will tell us whether you have osteoporosis, weak bones. Why are people with GSD prone to get osteoporosis? That is because they very often lack vitamin D. They have some troubles with the uptake of vitamin D, and they have some troubles to produce. You do not only have to take the vitamin D as a supplement, you can produce vitamin D yourself, but that is in the liver and then in the skin. It will be activated in the skin. So if your liver is not working well, you'll get low vitamin D. A lot of these people lack some calcium because they have to take one or another kind of diet. The acidosis caused by the elevated ketones will add to the problems of the bones, that will take the calcium out of the bones and give you weak bones. And your bones are only as strong as they are supposed to be. If you don't move, you get very, very brittle bones. And if you don't use your muscles, you will get very weak and thin bones. So that's why people with GSD, especially type 3A, are prone to get to develop osteoporosis. Then we check for infections, just to learn whether prealbumin is low because of infection, whether ferritin is high because of infection. And here we do the CRP and the sedimentation rate. We want to know about your glucose metabolism, whether your sugars usually are fine or not. And fine for GSD is if the sugar before a meal are around 70, or even better, around 75. And at least 1 hour after a meal, the blood sugar should be down again to 100 milligram per deciliter. I usually ask people to check the blood sugars before the meal, and as long as their body mass index, if their weight is okay, then I don't ask them to check it after the meal. But if I see that they gain too much weight, then I'll ask them to check the blood sugars 1 hour after the meal, and then I can figure out, oh, now the blood sugar is too high. That will say this person got too much carbohydrates during the meal. And you see, that's a very narrow range, but we have to be strict with these people. For a long period follow-up for the blood sugar, you can use this number, this ABH1C. That's something that people with diabetes to check. Or there's a new number, the IFCC, that should be not higher than 48. And that usually also gives you, or if you do that, you usually also will give a mean number for the sugar in your blood. And we usually say the mean number should be more than 4.5, but not too high. Maybe in the aging adults, people who are in their 55, 60, I would accept if the mean blood sugar is a little bit higher. It's usually not a sign of diabetes, if the weight and everything is fine in these people. Another number that we usually check, that's the lactate. Lactate for type 3, 6, and 9 is usually a sign of overtreatment, or that you eat too much carbohydrates. How does that come? If you have stored glycogen, too much glycogen in your liver, then there is no more space left. Look at that. If you have glycogen in your liver in type 3, 6, and 9, and you eat even more sugar, then your lactate will go this way, and you will have high lactates. And you remember about the type 0. Type 0, high lactate after a meal will tell me, oops, that was too much carbohydrates during the meal. And remember, type 0, they can't store the sugar, so they straight away will produce lactate if that was too much sugar that somebody ate. So that's the information that lactate will give me. Oh, and we are already at the point, what can I do to improve my numbers? How can I improve my liver numbers? Not too much carbohydrates, so I won't store too much sugar or glycogen in my liver. Don't have or try to avoid low blood sugars, because then you'll store the fat in your liver cells and the liver numbers will get up. And stay away from alcohol, especially the strong alcohol. That will give you high liver numbers for quite some time. What about the muscle numbers? Don't have too low blood sugars. What is happening if the blood sugar is low? You will have to take the proteins from the muscles to stabilize blood sugar. Try to eat enough protein. So if you really, at one point, had to use some of the protein from the muscles, then you can use the protein to build up the muscles again. And don't overdo your exercise, because that also will lead to elevated muscle numbers. How can I improve my protein numbers? First, you should eat protein and don't have low blood sugars, because then you will use the protein to get normal blood sugars again. Again, about the cholesterol, it's very boring. Don't have too low blood sugars, don't have too low blood sugars, because then again, your body will start to break down the fat and you'll have the high cholesterol. How can I get better glucose numbers? Don't eat too much sugars and don't eat too little. And really have a look at the simple sugars, because the consumption of simple sugar will lead to a very fast increase. Oh, sorry, somebody will come and take the phone, I hope. If you eat too much simple sugars, your blood sugar will get up very fast, and that won't be very good. Okay, how can you achieve that all? There are very simple rules about the diet for the Ketonic GSDs, and you know them. We went through them several times. First, frequent very important, and small meals every 3 to 4 hours, a snack or a meal. Try to find carbohydrates that are taken up from your intestine very slowly. Not too much carbohydrates. For the main meals, 15 grams of carbohydrates, and very little of this 15 grams carbohydrates should be simple sugars. For the snacks, it should be even less. High fiber. Fibers will help the body that the blood sugar is rising much slower. And the slower the blood sugar gets up, the less insulin you will produce, and the less of the sugar will be stored as glycogen. Use your cornstarch to keep blood sugar stable. Most of the people will need a small snack at bedtime, additionally to the cornstarch, and all the ketonic forms need extra protein. You see type 3A, a lot of protein, 3 to 4 grams per kilo body weight per day. That's really a lot. And the other types, between 2 and 2.5 grams. And I can tell you, if people are growing or in the beginning, if their metabolic control is not very good, that might be even more than these numbers. You might need some supplements because the cornstarch will give you some troubles with the diet. You won't eat all the stuff that other people eat. You are not allowed to eat too much of the fruits and all the stuff. So you usually need some vitamins. You might need some calcium. You might need some iron, but that's what your physician has to decide on from your blood samples. And most people will need some probiotics to stabilize the composition of the bacteria in your intestine, because otherwise cornstarch will change the composition of these bacteria, and that might give you some extra air in your intestine and some abdominal pain, things like that. So we use probiotics actually for all people who have to use cornstarch. Very important thing you have to remember. Please follow your diet and remember that you really have to limit the carbohydrates. The older you become, the less carbs you need. It's just because our body will burn slower and slower. And if you continue to eat the same amount of carbohydrates that you did when you were young, you'll just end by becoming fat. It's the same for the cornstarch, and that's why you, even in adults, have to control the cornstarch, the amount of cornstarch, I would say at least once a year, whether that's enough or whether that's already too much. What can you eat instead of the carbohydrates? Usually it's best to use more protein. That will give you the feeling of not being hungry. There's usually some less calories in it, and that will help you to keep your weight stable. Very important, try to exercise. Exercise is not only important for healthy people, it is very important too for glycogen storage disease people. If you exercise, you teach your body to use fat bed of glucose. That will say you get more and more independent from eating sugar. And that helps your body again to reduce your carbohydrate intake and stay away from alcohol and drugs. That's the 4 rules you should follow, and that will help you to stay well. You see this sentence with good metabolic control, all GSD people can get normal labs and have a great life. I know that many physicians will say, no, you can't achieve normal labs. You can. It is very hard, and you have to follow very strictly your diet, but it is possible. And as we don't know, or we know little about the long-term, the late complications in GSD, I really would advise everyone to try to get as normal labs as possible. I thank all those people who taught me a lot about GSD. And you see, it's not only the physicians like David Weinstein and Terry Derks and Kathy Ross, the dietitian of David Weinstein's team, but it's also you, because I've learned quite a lot from you. Thank you. And for those who don't speak German, stay
thank you very much, Ulrike. And now we will start with some questions for you.
Okay, welcome.
Look, Christine asked if we have some kind of illness.
Yeah.
How do you know how many extra carbs do we need?
Usually you can say 1 degree of temperature above 37 will result in 10% extra carbohydrates. That will say if you usually have to use, let's say 30 grams of cornstarch, but your temperature is 38, then you have to use 33 grams of cornstarch. But it really differs. So I actually would advise just use some more cornstarch, use some more sugar, and check your blood sugar more frequently. It won't help you that much to check the ketones. Why? Ketones get up with fever. Ketones get up with pain. So if you are sick, then it is best to control blood sugar.
If I do some physical exercise and my ketones have rise, should I have some fruit or slow carbs?
Usually,
slow carbs.
I would say some elevation of the ketones after exercise is okay, up to, let's say, 0.5 or 0.6. And then I just would usually say a small snack, as you have seen before, some 5 of carbohydrates. I wouldn't use too much of fruit or something like that. Fruit, that's the fast sugar, and that usually get you high blood sugars, and then your blood sugar will crash down. So I better would use, let's say, some bread or something, and we usually advise the people to add some protein and fat, let's say some cheese, because if you exercise,
thank you. If we feel without energy, should we force ourselves to do some sport?
Okay, the question is, what kind of sport would you say? Would you do if you're really poor? You won't run. You would start.
Well, I don't know. It's a question from Christine.
Yeah. But you see,
I have no idea.
Really, yeah, if you don't have energy, just get you some, let's say some 5 grams of cornstarch or 7 grams of cornstarch, and then do some very mild and gentle sport. Don't overdo it. Just walking, going for a walk or something like that. That's usually fine.
Mm-hmm. And now Elena asks, what consequences could provoke having high levels of B12 vitamin?
Aha, B12 usually gets up if you have some problems from the liver. If you have high liver numbers, very often your B12 gets up, but that's completely without harm. It's just like the elevated ferritin telling me that here is something that is not completely fine, but the B12 won't hurt you. So don't be afraid. It is just a sign there is something going on in the liver, but it won't harm you.
And how could we raise the acid folate?
You have to take it. You have to take the vitamins if you need that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you think about supplementing our diet with coconut oil?
The question is again and again, do you need fat? How much fat do you need? I don't know exactly. I'm not a dietitian. I think some oil or some coconut oil or whatever it is okay, especially if you do a lot of exercise. But as long as your weight is okay, I would think that's okay. But if your body mass index is getting too high, then would be careful. And be careful if you need energy, keep your blood sugar stable. That is more important than putting too much oil or fat into you. If your blood sugar is falling down, then you go for your muscles. And that's something we don't want.
Is it possible not to cover all the waste of energy during an exercise? Not even with cornstarch and protein?
If you do too much, sure, then you can't, then you won't be able to get enough energy. So usually if you do a very, very intense sport, like for example, lifting weight or something like that, then might hurt your muscles. So that's why we usually say use some moderate sports. And if you get the feeling that you have done too much, please eat some protein that will help you to rebuild your muscles.
Mm-hmm. Is it normal in children having stagnant values, or should they get better?
That they have what values?
I am analyzing labs values. I don't know.
The limits are different. That is true. You have different limits in very young children, then they get a little bit higher for children that are a little bit older, and in adults. If you take the liver numbers, for example, the normal range is much higher for children than it is in adults. So you have to look at the numbers that are appropriate for your age.
If the vitamin D level is okay in the lab reports, is it necessary continue using it?
Yes,
Yeah,
because otherwise it will. Yeah, because otherwise it will go down. There are very few people that I know who can manage without extra vitamin D. You know, in Germany, it is 80% of the people who are vitamin D deficient, who have too little vitamin D. And we know that too from Spain. So there are very few people who can manage without extra vitamin D. It's the same if you don't eat sugar. If you have a good sugar and you stop taking the maizena, then your blood sugar will fall low. If you have a fine vitamin D, it will take you, let's say, some 6 or 4 weeks, and then your vitamin D is gone.
Mm-hmm. Can we use the myoglobin strips for ketones?
No, you can use it, but these stripes in the urine are very, very imprecise. If you get positive ketones in your urine, then your blood ketones have been very high. So I would highly recommend to check ketones in blood.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and is there any other method to know them faster?
To know the ketones? Just the blood ketones?
Yes.
No, it's only in the blood, and it's the same. Most of you will know the freestyle, the blood, the glucose machine that most people use. You can use it for the blood sugar and the ketones. It's just, I know the stripes, they are incredibly expensive, but that's
Yes,
the only way that works, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, what recommendation would you give to improve our level labs for people that used to do some exercise, regular exercise?
Usually your labs should be fine when you are doing exercise. It's just if you are overdoing the exercise, then your CK usually will go up. And the high CK or breakdown of the muscles will give you high numbers of the ASAT and the ALAT, of the muscle enzymes, of the liver enzymes, even if the liver is fine. Usually if your CK is too high, either, especially in adults, or I'll start. If it is too high in children, then it is usually that they lack protein or that their blood sugar has not been stable enough. If the CK is too high in adults, then it is usually because they lack protein, or they don't have stable blood sugar, or, now listen, that they weigh too much. If they have too high weight, then their CK will get some troubles too, because the glycogen will be stored in the nerves, and that will harm your muscles too. So if you are an adult, then you really have to make sure that you get enough sugar or enough carbohydrates, but never too much. That is very important.
Mm-hmm. What are the statins?
The statins, that's a kind of medication that the physicians use to get your cholesterol down. That's very commonly used. I don't know the name of the stuff, but the statins is a group of medicine that is usually used to get the cholesterol down. And a regular physician, your general practitioner, usually does not know that the statins will hurt your muscles if you have GSD. So you have to tell them, I'm not allowed to use statins. My cholesterol is high because my metabolic control is not good. My GSD control is not good.
Mm-hmm. Aure asks, what kind of medicines have we restricted?
Yeah, that is especially it's the statins. You should not use growth hormone to get your blood sugar up. You should not use in women. You have to be very careful about the birth control pills. What else was that? There's another list. I forgot the other ones. I should have to look them up. But that's what you have to be careful with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay, how often should we check the blood sugar and ketones? Every day, several times a day?
How often do you check your blood sugar?
Sometimes 3 times a day or sometimes none.
Exactly. If you are stable.
No, 3, not 6.
Yeah. If you are completely stable.
This is a question from Christine.
Yeah. If your blood sugar is stable and fine, if your metabolic control is fine, I usually say, okay, once or twice a year for a whole day. But otherwise, okay. If you get sick, if you don't feel good, then you have to check the blood sugar. You have to do it more often in children. If they change their life, if they are moving from kindergarten to school, or if they are on holidays, things like that. Just if they change their daily routine, then you have to check the blood sugar. And then I usually would say, do it during a whole day, check the blood sugar before each meal, and check the ketones before the big meals and for 24 hours. And then you'll figure out whether you still cover their needs or whether you have to make some adaptations of the cornstarch or the meals.
Mm-hmm. What is the treatment for osteoporosis in GSD?
You should be able to answer that now, not you, because you have seen the slides. Take your vitamin D. Try not to have ketosis. Drink enough milk or eat yogurt or eat cheese, and exercise. If your muscles don't do anything with your bones, you'll get very thin bones. If you just lie down in your bed, you'll get very thin and brittle bones. So exercise and the other things, the vitamin D and the calcium, and the good metabolic control, that's the best thing you should do.
And now Andres asks if muscles distraction can manifestate with with fat lumps. Oh, with fat lumps. With, can you hear me?
I didn't get the first part of the question.
Oh, okay. With if our muscles are being destroyed,
yeah, they will be replaced by
manifested with grass in our legs or our arms.
Usually, if your muscles are
with fat, with fat lumps.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what will happen. If your muscles can be rebuilt, I don't know whether they, if your muscle has been broken down because your blood sugar was low or because you did too much exercise, you are able to rebuild your muscle if you eat enough protein. But I don't know how often you can do that. Whether you can do that 10,000 times or 20,000 times or only 5,000 times. So once there would be a point when your muscle will tell you, now I am no longer able to build up some muscle. And then the muscle will be replaced by fat. Exactly.
It is not restricted, the milk in GSD type.
In
GSD type.
In Ketonic GSD, milk is it is not as much restricted as it is in type 1. Milk, you have the milk sugar. The milk sugar is a double sugar that will say it first have to be splitted before it gets the blood sugar up. So if you ask me how much milk am I allowed to drink during a day, if you have a child, I would say 1 glass, some 200 milliliter with each meal, but not more. There are some people who drink 2 or 3 glasses with each meal. That is too much. Then their blood sugar will get too high and they'll start to store this either as glycogen or as fat. So milk is fine because you have some protein and you have the calcium, but it is better to limit the milk, that you in an adult will get something like half a liter or 1 liter per day. A child might be, something like the same, but not more than this.
What is DEXA control?
What is, I didn't get that. DEXA?
What is DEXA control?
I don't know. Can't tell you.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. There is another one. No. No, not by now. So that's all for now, I think.
Okay.
Isn't yes? No, that's all for now. We don't have any more.
Any more questions?
Okay. Christian says, you said we needed to do a DEXA control.
Say that once again. I didn't get the whole thing.
I don't know. Christine says, you said we needed to do a DEXA control.
We do need to do a...
yes, that's... All right. Samuel now asks if a bike Samuel, a bike is too much exercise for a child?
That depends. If a child uses the bike gentle, not to compete with its colleagues, then it is fine. But you have to start slowly. It's the same with all kinds of sports. Some of my patients, they are lifting weight and they are doing well. Their muscle numbers are fine because they started very slowly. Some of the people go for a swim. They are doing well. But then you have the other people who are very ambitious. They want to be the best. And for them, it's not good. Be gentle with your muscles. You have only got these muscles.
Elena is asking, yes, if the analyzing can be done half an hour after having breakfast.
Perfect.
Or we need some hours of having nothing.
No. Half an hour after breakfast, that should be okay.
Okay, thank you. How much do other factors like stress, tiredness, etc. influence the blood levels of transaminasas?
Not directly, but stress and all the stuff will go on your blood sugar. So that will give you a low blood sugar. And then all the mechanism that will start with a low blood sugar will begin. And that's why you secondarily might get some trouble from the liver numbers. It's not the stress directly that will give you some troubles from the liver.
Yeah, I'm having a check just to see if there is some more. I don't think there are any more. Yes, one, Elena asks, yes, to ride a horse is a good sport.
Yeah, that's something fine, I would say. Sure. You need some energy, but you won't need too much.
And Samuel says if it's yes, is it normal to be tired after doing some sport?
Ask healthy people, they will be tired too. But if to be tired is okay, if your muscles hurt, then it is usually a sign that you did too much.
And to have changing levels of transaminasas, is it normal?
As I tried to tell you, transaminases are not only from the liver. So a lot of people get elevated transaminases because their muscle numbers are getting high. These transaminases not only stem from the liver, but you can find them in the muscles too. Somebody who has elevated CK will have elevated transaminases. So if you take a blood sample after you did jogging or after you did a very long hike or something like that, your transaminases will go up. not because you did something bad to your liver, but because you hurt your muscle. So it's usually best to have not only the transaminases, but too the CK, so you can see how much of this liver numbers and how much is from the.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I can you hear now?
I can hear
No?
you.
Yeah, okay. Then that's all for now. And we thank you, Dr. Ulrike.
Oh,
Many thanks for being with us this afternoon. It has been a pleasure. And I hope to see you again soon.
Oh, me too. Stay healthy, all of you. And I hope to see you again.
Okay, thank you very much.
Already next year.
Yeah, sure.
Or then the year after that. No?
Thank you very much for everything.
Welcome.
And thank you to all the people who has been here watching and listening.
And if anybody has some questions left, you know my email address, and just ask them to send an email. I know there are still some emails that I did not answer, but I'll try to, to take one after the next to answer them.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Ulrike.
Welcome. Stay well, all of you. Okay. And thank you for translating, Lutz. That was really well done. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye to everyone.
Oh, thank you. Okay. See you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.